South Korea-China relations, which have been rocky in the past, are looking to be smoothed out gradually, with the two sides even planning a summit between their leaders. North Korea also spoke up this weekend, slamming Washington's military aid to Ukraine. Let's turn to Dr. Bruce Bennett for more. Good morning.
Good morning.
So the top diplomats of Seoul and Beijing met in New York on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, and they agreed to arrange a meeting between their leaders, raising hopes of a visit to South Korea by Chinese President Xi Jinping for the first time in a decade. Now, what would his visit mean this time if it actually happened?
Oh, I think it's an opportunity for South Korea and China to try to strengthen relations. China is South Korea's biggest trade partner. And so making sure that that relationship is strong is important to the economy of South Korea, despite all of the kinds of sanctions that are occurring because of Chinese support of Russia and other rogue countries.
Well, we also have to talk about North Korea. North Korean leader sister Kim Yo-jong publicly denounced the U.S. decision to supply additional military aid to Ukraine. Now, why is Pyongyang reacting to Washington's decision, especially when, there have been apparent arms deals between the regime and Moscow?
Well, and I think that's exactly the reason. North Korean leadership is embarrassed by violating international law. There have been sanctions against Russia. There are sanctions against North Korea. They should not be doing business with each other. And so they're trying to divert attention from their bad behavior to what the U.S. is doing, trying to make it look like we're doing something wrong when there are no sanctions against us from supporting Ukraine. And Ukraine is being targeted. I mean, their civilian population is being targeted by Russia. That is an incredibly terrible behavior that's unacceptable. But North Korea wants to help Russia divert attention from their really bad actions.
On top of that, there have been numerous comments and much speculation over a seventh nuclear test by North Korea, possibly around the time of the U.S. election in November. Dr. Bennett, do you think such a test is really imminent? What do you think?
I think it's possible. We don't know. I mean, Kim can't plan on doing 20 or 30 nuclear tests. He would get too much bad international response. He's got to limit himself to 1 or 2 or 3. So he's got to be ready. He's got to have his scientists telling him that they've got a weapon that works. It's now been 7 years since their last test. And he's looking for, I think, a very specific kind of weapon and hasn't had confidence in it for 7 years. He may now be getting the Russian help he needs to make it work. And politically, he would like to do it, I think, around the U.S. presidential election. The question is technically whether or not he can do that.
Well, do you think the North is trying to stoke tension ahead of the election then? Would you say that?
I think that they would be interested in doing that. I mean, look, presidential candidate Harris has made almost no statements on her prospective policy about foreign affairs of any kind, and certainly not about Korea. So people don't know what she's preparing to do. Trump has said more, but his past actions are weighing on him. I think that Kim has always wanted to be a media focus, and I think he thinks that if he does a nuclear test around the election, he's going to get a lot of attention and some policy response.
Definitely. And also, last weekend, Shigeru Ishiba was elected as Japan's incoming prime minister. Now, he says he's aiming to build what he says will be the Asian version of NATO. Now, what is his argument? I mean, why the need of such an Asian NATO?
Well, we look at the hostility of China, the hostility of North Korea, the hostility of Russia. They're not an alliance per se. They're more like a cartel in the way they're doing business with each other. But that's threatening. And I think that he is anxious to try to build a defensive capability against such threats.
Well, definitely that Asian version of NATO will get on China's nerves, but what will that mean for South Korea? I mean, is that a good idea for Seoul or not as much?
Well, we go back to the president or the Chinese leader visiting Seoul and not having done it in 10 years. China spent decades building its relationship with Korea, where it would have economic pressure that it could bring to bear on South Korea. It's now been working on other countries to establish a similar relationship. I think China is hoping that it can use pressure on Seoul to prevent Korean participation in that kind of relationship. And that's just what China will be anxious to do. The question is whether or not Seoul is prepared to withstand economic pressure from China that China's been preparing for decades.
Well, Dr. Bennett, Japan will have Ishiba as the incoming Japanese prime minister, and also there's the upcoming leadership transition in the U.S. Now, do you think the alliance between, or the trilateral cooperation between Seoul and Washington and Tokyo will remain, just as solid as it is now, even after the U.S. election, or, what do you think?
We don't know enough from either Trump or Harris about how they will approach Korea. The reality is, given Harris's background, it'll probably depend upon who she chooses to be, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, and her national security advisor, if she's elected. It may be similar with Trump, though he tends to override those people. We just don't know at this point in time who the key personnel are going to be in the relationship. I think there are strong incentives for all three countries to strongly cooperate with each other. It's really hard to tell whether or not there will be the people in place that makes that happen.
Alrighty, Dr. Bennett, thank you so much for your time and insight this morning. We appreciate it. You have a wonderful day.
My privilege. Thank you.